Come to you first, Ali. Any particular thoughts? Is the Conservative Party dead in its current form? It doesn't seem to be very popular.
You're certainly right. It's not popular, Andrew, but it's not dead. I've heard many stories about the demise of the Conservative Party in the last 20 years. It always manages to be the great survivor. It always rekindles itself, remodels itself in a new image. But let's be honest about where we are. Since that 80-seat majority in 2019, on the back of Parliament trying to frustrate Brexit for 3 years, Boris Johnson won a huge mandate, absolutely stonking mandate, and he threw it away. Why did he throw it away? Because of the 3 Ps. Patterson, parties and Pincher. None of these things were actually issues of policy. They were all issues of personality. That's why he failed. Then the Tory party had its love affair with Liz Truss over the summer. Utter disaster. Completely beyond the pale. I mean, look, you can do what you want in terms of cutting taxes in the middle of 400 billion of borrowing on the back of COVID, as long as you don't borrow any money from the markets. If you do borrow money from the markets, then you need to be mindful about how your message is going to go across. Starmer doesn't have to do much. The net is gapingly wide open for him to put the ball in the back of. Rishi Sunak, credible, hard-working, sensible guy, not a miracle worker, trying to bring the ship into port before it sinks.
And clear, it's clear that Sunak's in a difficult position. This is, there are global issues in terms of the cost of living crisis. He's come at the worst possible time. He's inherited a poison chalice, if you like. Yeah. But you talk about, Ali, about the idea of the Tory party being prepared to reinvent itself every now and then to win people over again. But is it really? I mean, even the option of Rishi Sunak feels like the same old, Well, look, I think Rishi Sunak, everything that Rishi Sunak said in the summer came to pass. I mean, he was warning about ridiculous tax cuts, totally unfunded, would be a complete and unmitigated disaster. And they were. The markets gave their verdict. And the very same markets, by the way, that the right of the Tory party worships. They completely said that this was beyond the pale. Look, yes. The reality is there are 3 big shocks that we're dealing with as a country. One is the post-Brexit shock, and I believe that we need to implement Brexit. Probably I didn't vote for it, but I accepted it. I wasn't one of these people who were trying to frustrate it for 3 years, which was completely ridiculous. The public voted, implement what they voted for. Secondly, we've had COVID, completely out of the blue, unforeseen. And then we were in the middle of a war, which is fueling inflation galactically in the form of rising energy prices. So you've got 3 massive shocks that the country is working through. And just take one example, Andrew. Before people talk about the NHS, before the pandemic, there were 1,300 people waiting more than 12 months on the NHS waiting list for an operation. Now it's 400,000. Of course there's going to be unrest. There's social unrest, political unrest across the thing. Well, let's bring Lizzi in here, because, so Ali makes a very good case that there are all sorts of circumstances beyond Rishi Sunak's control, and this is not necessarily all his fault. But really, those polls, they couldn't be much worse, could they?
Well, it's hardly surprising. The turmoil that we've seen so many... It's like a revolving door of prime ministers.
Oh, sure, there's that.
It's not going to instill confidence. And also, both political parties seem to be swayed by the wind on all this wokeism and all this popularism. And I just think that, they need to... wokeism is like the new fascism. You have to agree, otherwise you get blown out. And I think it kills any kind of creativity. It kills any kind of, new system or new way of looking at things. People are terrified to speak out. Yes. Otherwise, for the amount of criticism they get, etc., etc.
Well, a lot of people, Lizzie, will say that the culture war stuff is just a distraction from the actual issues, things to do with poverty, to do with the cost of living crisis. Calvin, do you think that they've got a point there?
No, unfortunately, I don't. I think the cultural issues are what matter most to the country right now, because it is fighting for the spirit of the country. It's who we are as a nation, what we believe in, and where we want to go. And if the Tory party can't answer that question, at least they can manage the finances. But then they're not even economically responsible anymore. So if the Conservatives aren't culturally conservative and they're not economically conservative, as we know they turned down Trussonomics quite recently, then what are they? They don't have an ideology.
So why aren't they conservative anymore? Well, and why did they turn their back on, Liz Truss? It was very weird to hear a Conservative PM saying conservative things all of a sudden.
The reason they turned their back on her is because they didn't want her in the first place. They wanted a globalist in power. And you're right in that politics is tribal, but it's not about a swing vote. It's not about convincing people to vote for your party. It's about getting your voters out. So there are tribes of Conservative voters, tribes of Labour voters, voters, and when there's an election, we go and knock on doors and say, come and vote for your party. But they won't do that this time because they don't have an ideology.
But we have seen people float from one to the other. I mean, the very fact that the Red Wall broke down.
Yeah.
I mean, Lizzie, that's incredible, isn't it? I mean, those people would never have voted Conservative in their life, and all of a sudden they do, and now it's swinging back the other way. It does feel like there is room here. If one of the parties took a major step to sort of reinvent themselves, they could break that deadlock.
Well, let's hope so, because we do want to have those people back into the fold again. But it's just deeply worrying that both sides don't seem to have very clear directions. Neither the Labour. I quite like Keir Starmer, but he's a little bit wishy-washy. He goes with the crowd. He always seems as if he's on the back foot instead of leading the charge.
Well,
I think if he
the Starmer issue is an interesting one, isn't it? Because it looks very much like he's going to be the next Prime Minister.
Yes.
But surely all of the stuff we're describing, you know, the Calvin mentioned the culture war issues, and Ali, you've been talking about the economy. But Starmer and Labour generally, they're not going to do any better, are they, Lizzie? I mean, you know, Labour doesn't have the best track record when it comes to rejuvenating the economy.
I think what happens with a lot of Labour voters is that when it comes to the general election, they pull back because I think they think, oh, God, the Conservatives, safe pair of hands. But I don't know if that's true anymore.
Well,
are they a safe pair of hands?
Ali,
No.
what do you think?
Well, look, in 92, right, after Major won that unexpected victory, you then had Black Wednesday. The Tory party never recovered its reputation for economic competence after that. In 97, the economy was doing reasonably well, but they got absolutely hammered, absolute landslide victory. And the thing is, I'm not saying we're heading to a landslide, right now. I mean, I don't think a landslide would be good for the country. But at the moment, it's difficult to conceive of a set of circumstances where the Conservatives are actually going to win this. I mean, electorally, it still looks very hard for Labour. But the reality is that the Tory party is so damaged now on the back of the Boris fiasco, the Truss. And Calvin says that the Tory party turfed out Truss because they didn't want her. Well, the MPs didn't want her. That's true. The party did. The MPs and the MPs and the party are often in different places. But let's not forget that the party also voted for Ian Duncan Smith. That didn't exactly work out too well, right?
Yeah.
So the party can make egregious errors of judgment until it comes to its senses, right? And this was a case where it patently was in the wrong place. And it was a disaster.
Just quickly before we move on, I just want to ask you, Calvin, because, we talk about Keir Starmer and the likelihood that he's going to be the next Prime Minister, and this distance in the polls between the Tories and Labour at the moment, is it just that people haven't really thought, we've got the Tories at the moment and things are bad, but they perhaps haven't got the foresight to see that they could be a whole lot worse, right?
I think people have realised that it doesn't really matter who's in power right now. It'll be the same old rubbish. Yeah. We need a party to stand out and say, we're different and this is what we'll offer. Yeah. Neither of the two are going to do that right now.
So then what would a Labour government look like to you?
Pretty much the same as what we've had, but longer lockdowns, harder lockdowns.
There's that possibility, certainly, because when the Tories were locking down, the Labour were calling for more.
Well, yeah, more woke issues, trans issues, all left, right and centre, relabelling people as women when they're men, and on the back of self-ID. All of that stuff will come to the forefront under Labour, but it won't be much worse. It will be a little bit worse.
OK, Lizzie?
I do think, though, that what you said is absolutely true. I do feel that there isn't a political party for me, which is the reason why I always vote Green. I do feel that
what about Reform, Reclaim, UKIP, SDP?
Yeah, but these small parties without proportional representation, they can't really...
But if everyone said, look, I'm going to vote for Reclaim tomorrow, if everyone in the country said, I'm going to vote for Reclaim tomorrow, they would get into power. If everyone keeps saying they're too small, I'm not going to vote for them, they won't.